When I met Lauren, she was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. I fell hard, and for a while, it felt like she fell just as hard for me. Our marriage wasn't just a partnership, it was a sanctuary. We built a home, raised two incredible kids, and shared dreams that felt unshakable. But as I stood in our kitchen one evening, watching the clock tick past midnight and listening to the eerie silence of the house, I couldn't help but wonder, when did everything change? Lauren had been coming home late more and more often. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always been dedicated to her job, climbing the corporate ladder with an energy that I admired. But lately, her absences felt different, longer, less predictable, and accompanied by vague explanations that didn't quite add up. "Work's been crazy," she'd say, tossing her bag onto the counter and avoiding eye contact. "Julian's been pushing everyone hard to meet deadlines." Julian. The name had started creeping into our conversations weeks ago, casually at first. Julian came up with this great idea, or Julian thinks we should restructure the department. It was clear he was someone important at her office, but the way she spoke about him felt off. There was an admiration in her voice that made my stomach churn, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. I tried to shake it off. After all, what kind of husband would I be if I didn't trust her? But the signs were becoming harder to ignore. Her once playful banter had turned into curt responses. The way she used to lean into me on the couch was replaced by her scrolling endlessly on her phone, her screen angled just out of my view. And then there were the late-night calls she claimed were work emergencies. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. We had been married for 10 years. Surely that kind of foundation couldn't be so easily shaken. But the cracks were there, no matter how hard I tried to plaster over them. And each day, those cracks seemed to grow wider. One evening, as I tucked our kids into bed, Liam asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Why doesn't Mom eat dinner with us anymore?" His voice was soft, his little face scrunched with confusion. I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? "Mom's just really busy with work right now," I said, forcing a smile. "But she loves you. Don't ever forget that." He nodded, satisfied for the moment, but his question lingered in my mind long after I left his room. When did Lauren start pulling away? And why couldn't I seem to pull her back? Later that night, as I sat alone at the dining table with my untouched dinner, I decided to confront her. I needed answers. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when the weight of her distance was crushing me. When Lauren finally walked through the door, her hair slightly disheveled and her cheeks flushed, I stood to meet her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She sighed, dropping her bag onto the counter. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't," I said, my tone firm. "What's going on, Lauren? You're never here anymore. You're always at work, or with—" I hesitated, the name catching in my throat. "Julian." She froze, her eyes narrowing. "Are you serious right now? You're jealous of my coworker?" "This isn't about jealousy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's about us. It feels like you're slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it." Lauren rolled her eyes, her irritation palpable. "Marcus, not everything is about you. I'm working my ass off to keep this family afloat, and all you can do is accuse me of— what? Cheating?" The word hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken until that moment. I didn't respond, unsure of whether I even believed it myself. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and no amount of reassurance from her could make it go away. That night, as I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a deep, gnawing ache in my chest. This was more than a rough patch. This was a fracture, a breaking point I couldn't ignore. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if we could fix it. Lauren had always been the kind of person who carried herself with confidence. It was one of the things I admired most about her, the way she could walk into a room and command attention without even trying. So when she started mentioning Julian, I initially thought nothing of it. He was just another coworker, another name in the endless stream of office stories she shared over dinner. But then Julian became more than just a name. He became a presence. At first, it was subtle. Lauren would drop his name casually in conversation. "Julian had this great idea for the project," or Julian really impressed the team during the presentation. Her tone was light, almost admiring. I told myself it was normal. She worked with the guy, after all. But as the weeks went on, Julian's name began to creep into more and more of our conversations. And every time it did, I felt a strange, unwelcome sensation in my chest. Was it jealousy? Suspicion? I couldn't quite tell. I started paying closer attention. Lauren was spending more time getting ready in the mornings, choosing outfits with care, experimenting with makeup she hadn't worn in years. When I teased her about it one morning, she brushed it off with a laugh. "I just want to feel good about myself," she said, but the way she avoided my gaze told me there was more to it. Then there were the late nights. Lauren had always worked hard, but now it seemed like she was married to her job. Dinner became a solitary affair for me and the kids, with Lauren texting to say she'd be home late, or sometimes not at all. "It's just this project," she'd say when I questioned her. "Once we wrap it up, things will go back to normal." But normal felt like a distant memory. The final straw came on a Saturday morning. Lauren and I were having coffee in the kitchen while the kids played outside. She was scrolling through her phone, a small smile playing on her lips. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Oh, just something Julian said yesterday," she replied without looking up. That was it. The knot in my stomach tightened, and I couldn't hold back any longer. "You talk about Julian a lot," I said, my voice carefully measured. "Do you spend a lot of time together?" She finally looked up, her expression somewhere between confusion and annoyance. "He's my coworker, Marcus. Of course, I spend time with him. Why are you acting like this?" "Because it feels like you're more excited to talk about him than you are to talk to me," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I feel like I'm losing you, Lauren." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, to reassure me that I was imagining things. But instead, she sighed and shook her head. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her tone clipped. "This is all in your head." Maybe it was. Maybe I was overreacting. But as Lauren walked out of the kitchen, her phone still in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was right. Something was happening. Something she wasn't telling me. That night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation in my head. I wanted to trust her, to believe that Julian was just a coworker and nothing more. But the changes in her behavior, the growing distance between us, the way she lit up when she talked about him, it all felt too real to ignore. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the things I could control. I threw myself into work, spent more time with the kids, and even took up running again, hoping the physical exertion would quiet my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, the doubts lingered, growing louder with each passing day. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening, and Lauren had texted to say she'd be working late again. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner when Liam came into the kitchen, holding up Lauren's phone. "Mom left this on the couch," he said, handing it to me. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart pounding. It wasn't locked. Lauren had always been lax about security, trusting me implicitly. Or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. What was I doing? This wasn't who I was. I didn't snoop, didn't invade my wife's privacy. But something about the way my gut twisted told me I needed to know. I opened her messages, scrolling past mundane conversations with friends and family until I saw his name. Julian. The messages were casual at first, work-related, friendly. But as I scrolled further, they became something else entirely. Flirty, personal, intimate. "You looked amazing today. Can't stop thinking about our conversation last night. I wish I could see you right now." My stomach churned as the truth stared back at me in black and white. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Lauren was slipping away, and Julian was the reason. I set the phone down, my hands trembling. The cracks in our marriage had widened into a chasm, and I had no idea how to pull us back from the edge. The night of the gathering was supposed to be a chance to reconnect with Lauren, a way to bridge the growing gap between us. We had invited close friends and a few of her coworkers to our home for drinks and dinner. I hoped that hosting a lively, familiar event would remind us of the partnership we once had, a reminder of the laughter, connection, and ease we used to share. I should have known better. Lauren had insisted on handling the guest list, and when I saw Julian walk through the door, I felt my stomach drop. He wasn't supposed to be here. I hadn't even known she'd invited him. He strode in confidently, wearing an expensive suit and a smirk that made my fists clench involuntarily. His presence was loud, commanding, as if he already owned the room. And worse, as if he knew exactly what he meant to me. "Marcus," Julian said, extending a hand as though we were old friends. I hesitated for a beat before shaking it, my grip firm, trying to convey a strength I wasn't sure I felt. "Julian," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, though the heat rising in my chest betrayed me. He smiled knowingly, as if he could see right through me. From the moment he arrived, he was everywhere. Lauren stayed close to him, introducing him to our friends, laughing at his jokes, and hanging on his every word. She looked radiant, more animated than I had seen her in months, but the sight didn't bring me any joy. It was like watching her shine for someone else, a painful reminder of the distance that had grown between us. I tried to play the role of the gracious host, mingling with guests and pouring drinks, but my focus kept drifting back to them. Julian's hand lingered on her lower back as they talked. His gaze locked on hers like she was the only person in the room. And Lauren? She wasn't pushing him away. If anything, she was leaning into him, her smile brighter, her laughter louder. It was like I wasn't even there. Then came the moment that shattered whatever composure I had left. Julian, with a drink in hand, raised his voice to address the room. "Can I have everyone's attention?" he called out, his tone light but commanding. The conversation quieted as all eyes turned to him. "I just want to say," he began, wrapping an arm around Lauren's shoulders, "how lucky I feel to have met this incredible woman. She's brilliant, talented, and honestly, Marcus, you're a lucky guy." His eyes flicked to me, his smirk widening. "Or at least, you used to be." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter, but I didn't find it funny. My jaw tightened as I stared at him, trying to decide if he was drunk, arrogant, or both. But he wasn't finished. "And since we're all friends here," Julian continued, raising his glass, "I think it's only fair to let you all know. I'm the new father of Marcus's kids." The words hung in the air, heavy and cutting. The room fell silent, the awkward laughter dying instantly. My vision blurred with rage as I watched Julian casually take a sip of his drink, the smirk never leaving his face. Lauren stood frozen beside him, her expression a mix of shock and something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Amusement? It didn't matter. I felt the humiliation burn through me, hotter and sharper than anything I had ever experienced. My friends, my colleagues, my wife, all standing there, witnessing my downfall at the hands of this smug bastard. The humiliation was suffocating. "Julian," I said, my voice low and steady, though I could feel the anger boiling beneath the surface. "That's enough." He turned to me, eyebrows raised in mock innocence. "Oh, come on, Marcus. Don't be so sensitive. We're all just having a little fun, aren't we?" I stepped forward, my fists clenched at my sides. "You're in my house, Julian. Show some respect." "Respect?" he repeated, laughing. "Marcus, respect is earned. And let's be honest, you haven't exactly been earning it, have you?" I don't remember deciding to hit him. One moment I was standing there, trying to hold myself together, and the next, my fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Gasps filled the room as I grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close. "You think you can come into my home and humiliate me?" I snarled. "You think you can take everything I've built and laugh about it?" "Marcus." Lauren's voice broke through the haze of my anger, but I barely registered it. All I could see was Julian's smug face, his arrogance finally replaced by a flicker of fear. I shoved him hard, sending him crashing into a nearby table. Glass shattered, and people rushed forward, trying to pull us apart. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. "Get out," I growled, my voice shaking with fury. "Get the hell out of my house." Julian staggered to his feet, his lip bleeding and his composure shattered. He glanced at Lauren, who looked horrified, before turning to me with a sneer. "This isn't over, Marcus," he said, spitting blood onto the floor. Not by a long shot. As he left, the room remained silent, everyone too stunned to speak. Lauren stared at me, her expression unreadable, and for the first time, I realized just how broken we truly were. The house was eerily quiet after Julian left, the shattered glass on the floor glinting under the dim light like shards of my broken pride. The guests whispered among themselves, some sneaking glances at me while others awkwardly shifted toward the door. I could feel the weight of their judgment, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My focus was on Lauren. She stood frozen near the kitchen island, her eyes darting between me and the mess Julian had left behind. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time in a long while, she looked completely lost. But instead of an apology or even an explanation, the first words out of her mouth were, "What were you thinking, Marcus?" Her tone was sharp, accusatory, as though I had been the one who crossed the line. What was I thinking? I repeated, incredulous. My voice rose as I stepped closer to her, the anger still coursing through me. What the hell were you thinking, Lauren? Inviting that smug bastard into our home, letting him humiliate me in front of everyone? She flinched at my words but quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. You didn't have to make a scene. You could have handled it better. Handled it better? I barked out a bitter laugh. The man just declared himself the new father of our kids in front of everyone, Lauren. What exactly was I supposed to do? Smile and shake his hand? Her silence was answer enough. She didn't have an explanation, at least not one she was willing to give. The weight of her betrayal, of her complicity, settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Tell me the truth, I said, my voice quieter now but no less intense. How long has this been going on? She frowned, her gaze dropping to the floor. Nothing's going on, Marcus. You're overreacting. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. I saw the way you looked at him. I heard the things he said. This isn't just in my head, Lauren. For a moment, it looked like she might deny it again. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a heavy sigh. It's complicated, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Complicated? I repeated, my heart sinking. That's all you have to say? She looked up at me then, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't mean for it to happen, Marcus. I didn't plan this. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the foundation of everything I thought we had crumbling into dust. So it's true, I said, my voice hollow. You've been having an affair. She didn't answer, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process the betrayal. My wife, the woman I had loved, trusted, built a life with, had been unfaithful, and not just with anyone, but with someone who had made it his mission to belittle and humiliate me at every turn. The sound of shuffling feet reminded me that we weren't alone. The guests were still there, lingering awkwardly in the living room, unsure whether to stay or leave. I straightened, forcing myself to put on a facade of composure. Party's over, I said, my voice firm but calm. Thank you all for coming, but I think it's time you head home. They didn't need to be told twice. One by one, they shuffled out, offering half-hearted goodbyes and awkward glances. I could feel their pity, their discomfort, and it only added fuel to the fire burning in my chest. By the time the last guest left, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. Lauren and I stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavily in the air. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know where to begin. How do you even start to address something like this? How do you confront the person you thought you knew better than anyone, only to realize they've become a stranger? Finally, I turned to her, my jaw tight and my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I want you to leave, I said, my voice low but steady. She blinked, startled. What? You heard me, I said, taking a step closer. Pack your things and go. I can't do this right now, Lauren. I can't even look at you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She nodded once, then turned and walked toward the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, the muffled thud of her suitcase being dragged out of the closet. When she finally came back down, her face was streaked with tears, but she didn't say a word. She paused at the door, as if waiting for me to stop her, but I didn't. I couldn't. When the door closed behind her, I sank into one of the dining chairs, burying my face in my hands. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that pressed in on you, suffocating and inescapable. My world had just fallen apart, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. But one thing was certain, I couldn't let this break me. For the sake of my kids, for the sake of my own sanity, I had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant starting over from scratch. When Lauren walked out of the house that night, a part of me expected to feel some sense of relief. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out the core of who I was. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. Even the faint ticking of the kitchen clock seemed to echo in the empty spaces she left behind. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring at the shattered glass on the floor and the overturned furniture from the fight with Julian. The mess was a perfect representation of my life, chaotic, broken, and impossible to ignore. I could still hear Julian's taunting words, the smugness in his voice as he declared himself the new father. The memory sent another wave of anger crashing through me, but there was no outlet for it now. Julian was gone, Lauren was gone, and I was alone with the wreckage of my marriage. By morning, I knew I couldn't let the situation fester. I had to act, not just for myself, but for my kids. Liam and Chloe didn't deserve to grow up in a household defined by betrayal and bitterness. I needed to protect them, even if it meant making the hardest decisions of my life. The first step was cleaning up the physical mess. I spent the morning sweeping up broken glass, righting the furniture, and scrubbing the wine stains off the carpet. It was therapeutic in a way, giving me something tangible to fix when everything else felt beyond my control. But as the house returned to some semblance of order, the emotional chaos remained. By midday, I called my lawyer. It wasn't an easy call to make, but it was necessary. I needed to understand my rights, to figure out how to navigate the divorce process and secure custody of my children. The thought of losing them, or worse, sharing custody with a woman who had already proven she couldn't be trusted, was unbearable. "Marcus, you're doing the right thing," my lawyer, Rachel, said after I explained the situation. "But you need to be strategic. Document everything, texts, emails, anything that proves her infidelity and Julian's provocations. The more evidence you have, the stronger your case will be." Her advice was practical, but it hit me like a cold splash of water. This wasn't just about my emotions anymore. It was about building a case, about preparing for a battle I never wanted to fight. Later that day, I sat down with Liam and Chloe to explain what was happening. It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had. "Mom and I need some time apart," I began, choosing my words carefully. "It doesn't mean we don't love you. It's just that we need to figure some things out." Liam frowned, his young face etched with confusion. "Is it because of that man at the party?" I froze, caught off guard by his question. How much had they seen? How much had they understood? "It's complicated," I said finally. "But what matters is that you're safe, and we both love you very much." Chloe, too young to fully grasp the situation, crawled into my lap and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, her tiny arms wrapped around my neck. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, my voice cracking. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would protect them at all costs. No matter how messy things got, no matter how much pain I had to endure, I would make sure they grew up in a stable, loving environment. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and difficult conversations. Lauren tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored her. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or her attempts to justify what she had done. I needed space to process everything, to figure out my next steps without her interference. Then came the call that changed everything. It was from Julian's lawyer. "Mr. Carter, my client is prepared to press charges against you for assault," the voice on the other end said, cold and clinical. "He has documented his injuries and is seeking damages for pain and suffering." I clenched the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Of course Julian would take this route. He was a coward, the kind of man who thrived on provoking others and then playing the victim when they fought back. But I wouldn't let him win. Not this time. That man walked into my home and humiliated me in front of my family, I said, my voice steady but firm. I won't let him get away with this. Then I suggest you prepare for a legal battle, the lawyer replied before hanging up. I called Rachel immediately, explaining the situation. She assured me we had a strong case, especially if I could prove Julian's behavior was intentional and malicious. But the prospect of a drawn-out legal fight weighed heavily on me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my kids, my future, and the kind of life I wanted to build for them. That night, as I sat in the quiet house, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. I didn't ask for this fight, but I wouldn't back down from it either. Julian and Lauren had underestimated me, assuming I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal. But they were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. The aftermath of the fight with Julian and the revelations of Lauren's betrayal left me standing at the edge of a chasm, staring into the void of uncertainty. But the moment Julian's lawyer called to inform me of his intent to press charges, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to roll over and let him or Lauren dictate how this story ended. If they thought they could crush me, they were about to learn otherwise. My first call was to Rachel, my lawyer. She listened intently as I detailed the events of the party, the humiliation, Julian's provocations, and the altercation. When I finished, there was a pause on the line before she spoke. Marcus, we have a solid defense here. Julian's actions were deliberate and inflammatory. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment brawl. It was provocation. Her confidence gave me hope. What about Lauren? I asked, dreading the answer. Her involvement, her betrayal, how does that affect things? Rachel sighed. Lauren's affair doesn't directly affect Julian's assault claim, but it's relevant in terms of context. We'll need evidence of their relationship and his behavior leading up to the incident. Can you gather anything? Texts, emails, anything that shows his intent to provoke you or his relationship with Lauren? That night, I began combing through everything I had. Messages, photos, even conversations I vaguely remembered. It was a painful process, reliving the moments when Lauren had chosen Julian over me. But it was necessary. Every screenshot, every snippet of evidence I found added fuel to the fire burning inside me. I wasn't just fighting Julian. I was reclaiming my dignity. Meanwhile, Lauren tried to contact me. At first, it was sporadic. Texts asking to talk, or saying we needed to sort things out for the kids. But when I didn't respond, her messages became more frantic. One night, she showed up at the house, banging on the door. Marcus, please, she called, her voice breaking. I need to explain. I stood on the other side of the door, my hand resting on the handle. Part of me wanted to let her in, to demand answers, to unload every ounce of hurt and anger I felt. But the stronger part of me knew better. Opening that door wouldn't lead to resolution. It would lead to more pain, more manipulation. I don't want to hear it, Lauren, I said through the door, my voice steady. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Her sobs echoed through the wood, but I didn't budge. Eventually, she left, and the silence that followed was both heavy and liberating. The legal battle with Julian moved forward, and the court date loomed closer with each passing week. Rachel worked tirelessly, building a case that painted the full picture of Julian's behavior. She included witness statements from the party, testimony about his taunts and provocations, and even evidence of his inappropriate relationship with Lauren. It wasn't just about proving my innocence. It was about exposing the kind of man Julian truly was. In the meantime, I focused on my children. Liam and Chloe were my anchor, the reason I kept pushing forward even when the weight of it all felt unbearable. I made a point to be present for them, helping with homework, playing games, and taking them on weekend outings. I wanted them to know that no matter what happened between their mother and me, they were my priority. One evening, as I tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at me with a seriousness that caught me off guard. Dad, he said, are you and Mom going to be okay? The question broke my heart. I wanted to shield him from the truth, to protect him from the pain of what was happening. But I also knew I couldn't lie to him. We're figuring things out, I said gently. But no matter what, you and Chloe are what matters most. We both love you very much. He nodded, his little face thoughtful. I love you too, Dad. Those moments with my kids reminded me why I was fighting so hard. It wasn't just about clearing my name or standing up to Julian. It was about building a future where they could thrive, free from the chaos their mother had brought into our lives. As the court date approached, Rachel and I went over the case repeatedly, preparing for every possible outcome. I felt a mix of nerves and determination, knowing that everything was riding on this. Julian wanted to paint me as a violent, unstable man, but I was determined to show the truth. The day of the trial finally arrived. Sitting in the courtroom, I watched as Julian entered, his arm in a sling and a smug expression on his face. Lauren wasn't there, which didn't surprise me. She had made her loyalties clear, and I no longer expected her support. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke honestly about the events of that night. I described Julian's taunts, his blatant disrespect, and how he had pushed me to the breaking point. Rachel presented the evidence we had gathered, piece by piece, dismantling Julian's claims of innocence. By the end of the trial, it was clear who the real aggressor was. The verdict came swiftly, not guilty. Julian's case was dismissed, and the judge admonished him for his behavior. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice had been served, and I could finally begin to move forward. But the fight wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of my divorce from Lauren and securing custody of my children. And while the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face whatever came next. The victory in court against Julian was a turning point, but it wasn't the end of my struggles. The divorce proceedings loomed ahead, and I knew they would be far more emotionally draining than any courtroom fight with Julian. This wasn't just about legal battles. It was about my family, my children, and what was left of the life I had built with Lauren. Lauren's behavior during the legal battle with Julian had already solidified my resolve. Her absence in court and her inability to acknowledge the damage she caused had shown me exactly where her priorities lay. And now, as we prepared for the divorce, I realized she was still trying to play the victim. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Vanessa, wasted no time in framing Lauren's case. Lauren is seeking joint custody, Vanessa told Rachel during our first mediation session. She believes it's in the best interest of the children to maintain equal access to both parents. Equal access. The phrase made my blood boil. Lauren had already proven she couldn't prioritize the kids over her own desires. Her affair with Julian, her absence from their lives during the fallout, her attempts to manipulate me, it all painted a clear picture of someone unfit to share custody. But I also knew the courts didn't care about feelings. They cared about facts. I worked with Rachel to build my case. I documented everything, texts from Lauren that showed her neglectful behavior, instances where she left the kids with me to spend time with Julian, even Liam's innocent questions about why his mom was never home. Every piece of evidence painted a picture of a woman who had chosen her own happiness over her family's stability. Lauren, of course, fought back. She painted me as a controlling husband, claiming I had driven her into Julian's arms by being emotionally unavailable. It was a narrative that stung, not because it was true, but because it was so far from the man I had tried to be. I had loved Lauren deeply, and while I wasn't perfect, I had always done my best to support her. During one particularly tense mediation session, Lauren turned to me, her voice trembling with anger. "You're trying to take my children away from me," she said, her eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I met her gaze, my voice calm but firm. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to see you choose Julian over them? Over us? This isn't about punishment, Lauren. It's about what's best for Liam and Chloe." Her face crumpled, but I couldn't let myself feel sympathy. I had to stay focused. This wasn't about her feelings or mine. It was about creating a stable, loving environment for my kids. Outside of the legal battles, I poured my energy into being the best father I could be. I took Liam to his soccer practices, helped Chloe with her school projects, and made sure our home was a safe haven where they could thrive. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when I felt the weight of it all crushing down on me, nights when I missed the simplicity of the life we used to have. But every time I looked at my kids, I knew it was worth it. One evening, as I was helping Chloe with her homework, she looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" I replied, sitting back in my chair. She shrugged, her little brow furrowed in thought. "You smile a lot, but sometimes you look sad when you think no one's watching." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Kids are far more perceptive than we give them credit for, and Chloe had seen through the facade I tried so hard to maintain. "I'm happy because I have you and Liam," I said honestly. "And no matter what, that's what matters most to me." She nodded, satisfied with my answer, and went back to her homework. But her question stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind as I navigated the challenges ahead. Eventually, the divorce proceedings reached their conclusion. The judge awarded me primary custody, with Lauren receiving supervised visitation rights. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like one. There was no joy in watching the mother of my children lose her place in their lives, even if it was her own actions that led us here. Lauren's reaction was a mix of anger and despair. She accused me of turning the kids against her, of ruining her life, of being vindictive. But I didn't engage. I had learned by now that arguing with her only drained my energy, and I needed that energy for Liam and Chloe. As the dust settled, I realized I had gained something far more valuable than legal victories or moral vindication. I had gained clarity. The chaos of the past year had stripped away the illusions and forced me to confront the truth about myself, my marriage, and what I wanted for my future. And while it hadn't been an easy journey, I felt stronger for having endured it. Lauren's choices had left scars, but they hadn't broken me. I was still standing, and for the first time in a long while, I could see a path forward. With the divorce finalized and custody of Liam and Chloe secured, I thought I'd feel a sense of relief, but the reality was more complicated. The battle might have been over, but the wounds it left were still fresh. Lauren's betrayal, the legal battles, and the sheer emotional toll of it all had left me drained. But life doesn't stop for pain. My kids needed me, and if I was going to provide them with the stability they deserved, I had to keep moving forward. Lauren, on the other hand, was unraveling. Word of her affair with Julian had spread among our social circles, and her reputation was in shambles. She had been forced to move into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the comfortable life she once knew. Her supervised visits with the kids were awkward at best. Liam was polite but distant, while Chloe, too young to fully understand, clung to me whenever Lauren came around. It was during one of those visits that Lauren tried to reach out to me again. She waited until the kids were playing in the next room before turning to me, her expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "Marcus," she began, her voice trembling, "I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But can't we find a way to move past this? For the kids?" I stared at her, my emotions swirling in a complicated mess. This was the woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, the person I had built a life with. But she was also the person who had destroyed that life, who had chosen someone else over her family. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was sadness. "We are moving past this, Lauren," I said, my tone firm but not unkind. "But that doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were. The kids and I are building a new life now, and you need to figure out how to be a part of it in a way that works for them." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't tell if she truly understood. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to ease her pain, but I knew that wasn't my responsibility anymore. She had to face the consequences of her choices, just as I had to focus on rebuilding my life. That rebuilding process wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I started therapy, something I had been hesitant about for years. Sitting in that small office, talking to a stranger about my deepest fears and vulnerabilities, felt uncomfortable at first. But over time, it became a lifeline. My therapist helped me unpack the anger and betrayal I had been carrying, showing me how to let go of the things I couldn't control and focus on what truly mattered. Outside of therapy, I threw myself into work and fatherhood. I accepted a promotion at my company, one that required longer hours, but came with the financial security I needed to provide for Liam and Chloe. The long days were exhausting, but they were also rewarding. Each milestone at work, each smile on my kids' faces, reminded me that I was capable of creating something meaningful, even in the aftermath of so much pain. One of the most unexpected sources of support came from an old friend, Olivia. We had lost touch over the years, but she reached out after hearing about my divorce. At first, it was just casual conversations, catching up over coffee, reminiscing about the past. But as the weeks turned into months, our friendship deepened. Olivia was kind, understanding, and, most importantly, she didn't pity me. She saw me not as a man defined by his scars, but as someone who had survived and grown stronger because of them. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the kids play in the yard, Olivia turned to me and said, "You know, Marcus, you've come a long way. I hope you see that." I looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes catching me off guard. "Some days it doesn't feel that way," I admitted. "Some days it still feels like I'm just trying to keep my head above water." "That's the thing about healing," she said with a small smile. "It doesn't happen all at once. It's messy and slow, but it's still progress." Her words stayed with me long after she left that night. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the progress I had made, not just in my career or as a father, but as a person. I was no longer defined by Lauren's betrayal or Julian's provocations. I was more than the pain they had caused me. Lauren, meanwhile, was struggling to find her footing. Her relationship with Julian had ended spectacularly when his reputation took a hit after the court case. She was left alone, facing the reality of her actions and the fallout they had caused. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was trying to piece her life back together, but I didn't dwell on it. Her journey was hers to navigate, just as mine was mine. By the end of that year, I felt like a different man. The anger and resentment that had once consumed me were fading, replaced by a quiet determination to build a life I could be proud of. Liam and Chloe were thriving. Olivia had become a constant presence in our lives, and I was finally starting to feel a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. I was ready to face it head-on, knowing that I had the strength to weather whatever storms might come my way. By the time the dust settled on the chaos Lauren and Julian had left in their wake, I found myself standing in a place I never thought I'd reach: peace. It didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't easy. It was a process, one that required time, patience, and an unflinching willingness to confront my own pain. But now, looking at the life I had rebuilt, I could finally breathe without the weight of anger dragging me down. Liam and Chloe were my greatest joy. Watching them grow and thrive reminded me of what truly mattered. Their laughter echoed through the house like music, and their small victories, Liam scoring his first soccer goal, Chloe mastering her multiplication tables, became the moments I cherished most. I wasn't just their father. I was their safe place, their constant. It was a responsibility I wore like armor. Lauren, on the other hand, had faded into the background of our lives. Her supervised visits with the kids were sporadic at best. Sometimes she showed up, sometimes she didn't. At first, I worried about how her inconsistency might affect Liam and Chloe, but they seemed to take it in stride. It was as if they had adjusted to her absence long before it became official. They leaned on me, and I made sure to never let them down. One day, during one of her rare visits, Lauren pulled me aside. She looked thinner, her eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "Marcus," she began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I studied her for a moment, searching for the sincerity behind her words. I believed she meant it, at least in that moment. But her apology wasn't for me. It was for herself. She needed closure, a way to move on from the damage she had caused. And while I understood that, I wasn't ready to give her the absolution she sought. "I accept your apology, Lauren," I said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It means I'm choosing to move forward, for me and for the kids." Her face crumpled, but I didn't linger. I had spent enough time looking backward. It was time to focus on the road ahead. As the months passed, I found myself reconnecting with parts of myself I had forgotten. Therapy had become a cornerstone of my healing, helping me untangle the anger and betrayal that had once consumed me. My therapist encouraged me to explore hobbies I had neglected, so I started running again. It became my outlet, a way to clear my mind and find clarity. I even signed up for a local marathon, something I hadn't done since my college days. Crossing that finish line felt like a metaphor for everything I had endured, a testament to my resilience. And then there was Olivia. What had started as an old friendship rekindled had grown into something deeper. Olivia was a light in my life, a source of stability and warmth when everything else felt uncertain. She didn't try to fix me or offer empty platitudes. She simply showed up, consistently, patiently, and with a kindness that felt like a balm to my soul. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You've come so far, Marcus. I hope you know that." Her words struck a chord. I had come far. The man I was now, the father, the friend, the partner, I was proud of him. And for the first time, I could see a future that wasn't defined by Lauren's betrayal or Julian's provocations. It was a future I had built with my own two hands, a life that was entirely my own. But closure isn't always clean or easy, and mine came in the form of a chance encounter with Lauren. I was picking Liam and Chloe up from school when I saw her in the parking lot. She looked different, older, more fragile. She smiled awkwardly when she saw me, and for a moment, we just stood there, the weight of our shared history hanging in the air. "Hi, Marcus," she said, her voice tentative. "Lauren," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to say thank you for being a good father, for being the stability the kids need." I know I wasn't that. Her words caught me off guard. There was no defensiveness, no excuses, just an acknowledgement of the truth. And for the first time, I felt a twinge of something I hadn't expected, empathy. "Thank you," I said simply. "But they need both of us, Lauren. If you're ready to be there for them, I won't stand in your way." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, and for the first time, I believed she might actually mean it. It didn't erase the past, but it was a step forward, for her and for me. That night, as I tucked Liam and Chloe into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had fought for it, rebuilt it, and now I was ready to live it fully. Standing on the back porch with Olivia later that evening, I looked out at the stars and felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the strength I had found in the aftermath. Life had tested me, but I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the quiet house. Liam and Chloe were already up, their laughter echoing from the backyard as they played with the dog. I stood in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, and allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. It had been a long, arduous road, but I was finally here, at peace, and at the beginning of something new. The months following my final encounter with Lauren had been transformative. She had taken small steps to rebuild her relationship with Liam and Chloe, and while her efforts were inconsistent, I made sure not to let her failures define their relationship with her. They deserved to love their mother, no matter her mistakes, and I had learned to let go of the bitterness that once clouded my judgment. But my focus was on the life I was creating for us. My career had reached new heights, with a recent promotion cementing the stability I had worked so hard to achieve. The new role came with challenges, but it also provided opportunities. Opportunities to give my kids the life they deserved and to finally enjoy the fruits of my labor. And then there was Olivia. She had become an integral part of my life, not by forcing her way in, but by being there when I needed her most. Her presence was steady, comforting, and everything I hadn't realized I needed. She adored Liam and Chloe, and they, in turn, had come to see her as a trusted figure in their lives. One evening, as we sat together on the couch after putting the kids to bed, I reached for her hand. "You've changed everything for me," I said, my voice quiet but earnest. "I don't know if I would have made it through all this without you." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You didn't need me to make it through, Marcus. You were already strong. I just reminded you of what you were capable of." Her words stayed with me, a constant reminder of how far I had come. I no longer defined myself by Lauren's betrayal or Julian's taunts. Those were chapters in my story, yes, but they weren't the whole book. I had grown, rebuilt, and found something far more meaningful than what I had lost: peace. The kids, too, had flourished in our new normal. Liam had joined a travel soccer team, his confidence growing with every game, while Chloe had discovered a love for art, her bedroom walls now covered in her colorful creations. Watching them thrive filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. They were my greatest achievement, the reason I had fought so hard to rebuild our lives. One weekend, we decided to take a trip to a nearby lake, something I hadn't done since before everything fell apart. As I watched Liam and Chloe splash in the water, their laughter carrying on the breeze, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Olivia sat beside me on the picnic blanket, her hand resting on mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could exhale. "I think we've finally found it," I said, more to myself than to her. "Found what?" she asked, tilting her head curiously. "Peace," I replied, glancing at her with a smile. "And maybe a little bit of happiness, too." She squeezed my hand, her smile matching mine. "You deserve it, Marcus. You all do." Back at home that evening, after the kids were asleep, I found myself standing on the back porch, looking up at the stars. It had become a nightly ritual for me, a way to reflect on the day and remind myself of everything I had to be grateful for. The pain of the past was still there, lingering like a faint scar, but it no longer defined me. I had found closure, not just with Lauren but with myself. The next morning, Olivia and I sat down with the kids to share some exciting news. "How would you two feel about Olivia moving in with us?" I asked, my heart pounding as I waited for their response. Chloe's eyes lit up. "Does that mean she'll cook dinner with us every night?" Olivia laughed, reaching over to ruffle Chloe's hair. "Only if I don't burn it," she joked. Liam, ever the thoughtful one, nodded slowly. "I think it's a good idea," he said. "You make Dad happy." The simplicity of his statement brought a lump to my throat. Olivia smiled at me, her eyes glistening with emotion, and I knew we were making the right decision. This wasn't just about us. It was about building a life that felt whole, a family that felt complete. Months later, I found myself standing in the backyard, surrounded by friends and family as we celebrated my birthday. Olivia had planned the whole thing, a surprise that left me both touched and overwhelmed. As I looked around at the people who had supported me through my darkest days, I felt a surge of gratitude. Lauren wasn't there, of course, but I had made my peace with that. She was working on herself, or so I had heard, and while our paths had diverged, I wished her well. I didn't need her forgiveness, nor did I need to give her mine. We were simply two people who had shared a life and gone separate ways. As the sun set and the party wound down, I stood on the porch with Olivia, Liam, and Chloe, watching the last of our guests drive away. The kids were tired but happy, their laughter still echoing in my ears. I wrapped an arm around Olivia, pulling her close. "Thank you," I said softly. "For what?" she asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "For being here. For believing in me. For everything." She looked up at me with a smile. "You didn't need me to believe in you, Marcus. You've always been enough." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed her.